Hello my friends and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering my pick for the best Shadow Magic Sorcerer build in Baldur's Gate 3. Sorcerers are already one of the most powerful possible characters in Baldur's Gate. Their basic mechanics are just so incredibly strong, and Shadow Magic Sorcerer adds one of the other most powerful mechanics, Darkness, to Sorcerer's already incredible chassis. In addition to that, you get a very good dog who helps keep you alive by absorbing enemy attacks and providing you a ton of extra agency on the battlefield. So for a sorcerer that wants to play a little bit more of a defensive game, Shadow Magic Sorcerer gives you incredible tools with the Darkness Abuse and the Summon, as well as, of course, all of Sorcerer's staggeringly strong offense by default. If you want to play a Patch 8 character that just brings raw power to the table, Shadow Magic Sorcerer is one of the best possible. This is just an extremely powerful class that will work very well in any Honor Mode party. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Onsitane for the $25 donation, Emo Violence for the $25, and Bojankis, John Walker, and Rennell for becoming channel members. Thank you so much, my friends. I really appreciate the support, and it really means a lot to me. Alright, let's get building. I'm using this Githyanki custom character as the example character here because as a sorcerer, one of the most important things that you can get from your race is armor or shield proficiencies. Githyanki get medium armor proficiency, which is a huge boost to your armor class and defensive capabilities as a spellcaster, and also get the once per day Misty Step as a great panic button, useful for getting out of melee, and also the Astral Knowledge feature, which improves your skill access, especially for dialogue skills, immensely, something that sorcerers already excel at, so it will make you even better at being the party face. So Githyanki are one of the races I recommend most strongly. Other great picks include anything with shield proficiency, so human, especially half wood elf, which gives you the bonus movement speed and light armor and shield proficiency, or halfling for the ability to reroll ones, which will make you much better at maintaining concentration on your spells. One race that I would normally recommend very strongly for a darkness user is half drow, because the extra casts of darkness are useful. However, the way that Shadow Sorcerer interacts with darkness, actual casts of the darkness spell or arrows of darkness are much less useful to us. We have to use our darkness ability in order to see through it. So half drow is still a great pick because of all the proficiencies that you get, but less impactful for this build than for other builds. For companion characters, I think that this build fits very well in terms of flavor for Will, because it's a lot of darkness synergy and spellcasting, or for Astarion, if you want to play him as a more spellcasting-focused character. His pursuit of magical power fits very well with a career in Shadow Sorcery. For this build, we're going to be focusing on a monoclass Shadow Sorcerer, and in general, that's just how I would recommend building Shadow Sorcerer. There are certainly some multi-classes that can be pretty powerful. One level of Warlock can get you medium armor and shield proficiency with Hexblade Warlock, as well as Eldritch Blast for more ranged damage. A level of Bard can get you skill proficiencies. A level of Wizard can get you access to spell scribing for all of the wizard spells. But in general, if you're playing a Shadow Sorcerer, you're very happy to just take 12 levels, because this class doesn't multiclass as well as the other sorcerers, because a lot of your abilities want to be high level, and benefits a lot from just scaling up levels in this class. So often you're just going to want to take 12 levels in Shadow Sorcerer, so that's what we're going to be focusing on building today. For our cantrip selection with this character, we actually have some very interesting considerations when we're building a Shadow Sorcerer. Because of how the omens work provided by our level 6 summon, which we'll talk about a little bit more when we get there, we want our party, not necessarily this character specifically, but our party as a whole, to have access to every elemental damage type, all 6 elemental damage types, so fire, cold, lightning, poison, thunder, and acid. This character can get several of these from cantrips, but it would require taking cantrips that are generally weaker. Things like Acid Splash or Poison Spray are generally weaker cantrips. So we're going to get 2 of the 6 elemental damage types for free from Firebolt and Ray of Frost, giving us both fire and cold access, because these are just generally speaking the best combat cantrips regardless. And then lightning we're going to get from our spells, and the others we're going to cover from our items, and the others we're going to cover from itemization on our party members and everything else. So we don't need, even though we want to have poison damage, we don't need to take a bad cantrip like Poison Spray in order to enable that. The To round out our cantrips, we're going to take Friends. Of course, as a charisma-based character, sorcerers will often be your party face and can benefit a lot from the Friends cantrip. And we're going to take Minor Illusion. As an AoE damage character, being a sorcerer, being able to group enemies before combat starts by luring them to the same location with Minor Illusion can set you up for extremely powerful encounters where you just one-shot every enemy because you've grouped them all on top of each other and you can hit them all with an AoE spell all at once. For our spell selection at first level, we're going to take Chromatic Orb. Not only is this the best level 1 combat spell in general, it's just a great damage source. It can put surfaces on the ground, including an ice surface to crowd control your enemies, or a fire surface for additional damage. It also, by itself, gives you access to every elemental damage type. Now, you want to have these in ways that don't cost you resources, but Chromatic Orb is a great way to trigger these omens, because you can just choose one of the 6 and get a 1 sorcery point refund against any enemy that has an omen on it. So it's the best spell regardless of that, but it also synergizes particularly with Shadow Magic Sorcerer's minigame that comes from the omen summons. We're also going to take the Shield spell, because this is the best defensive spell in the game, and very, very helpful, of course, on Honor mode. It will keep you alive in the early game in ways that basically nothing else can, and gives you a great use for your reaction throughout the entire game. For our subclass, of course, we're taking Shadow Magic Sorcerer, because it wouldn't be a Shadow Magic build otherwise, and we get 2 subclass features immediately. The first of these is Superior Dark Vision, letting us see up to 80 feet in the dark. This is great if you're playing a race that doesn't have dark vision, and also leans you more towards racial selections that don't give you dark vision naturally. Dark vision in Baldur's Gate is not a huge deal. Most characters will have access to it if they need it, and a lot of arenas are lit anyways, so you mostly don't need dark vision, but this is definitely a nice to have, and will prevent you from taking penalties in unlit areas. The second of these is Strength of the Grave, which when you reach 0 hit points, you go back to 1 hit point instead of getting knocked unconscious, which is very useful, especially in the early game as sort of an emergency button. Now, obviously, you don't want to rely on this ability. Being at 1 hit point is not where you want to be, and you don't want your spellcasters taking enough damage to go to 0 hit points anyways. So Strength of the Grave, hopefully, will never happen during your Honor mode run, but this can keep you alive. One other thing to be aware of is that you don't always want to rely on this because enemies that do multiple damage instances in the same attack, like let's say they have a burning greatsword that deals damage with the sword itself and then fire damage, will often kill you through Strength of the Grave because the game will do the damage in order. So it'll hit you with the sword damage, then you'll come back at 1 hit point, and then the fire damage will still kill you. So don't rely on this ability, but it can save an Honor mode run that's going very badly if it happens to come up. For our ability score selection, we get to go with a very classic attribute spread for this character, so we're going to take 16 in Charisma and 16 in Dexterity, and then we're going to drop our Intelligence down to 8, buff our Wisdom up to 12, and take 14 in Constitution. This character, even more than most spellcasters, wants to go first in combat, because often you can prevent yourself from taking a hit by laying down a darkness field, and then enemies won't be able to retaliate against you. Or, of course, for all the normal reasons that going first is great, you can kill enemies before they get to take their turn, or lock them down with control spells before they get to act. So Dexterity is, generally speaking, more important than Constitution for this build. We also, of course, as a sorcerer, have Constitution save proficiency, so we're less incentivized to pick up high Constitution because we don't need it as badly to maintain concentration on our spells. Though, given that you have darkness fields to hide in, and the shield spell to defend yourself with, and so on, we should be avoiding taking hits in the first place and shouldn't usually be making concentration checks regardless, because we want to use our concentration spells either to stop our enemies from acting or stop them from attacking us. For your skill selection, the most important thing is to make sure that you have Persuasion. It's the most important of the 4 dialogue skills, being used in the most important and most valuable and also most numerous conversation checks, and it also governs your prices at merchants. So having the highest Persuasion check possible is extremely important. For your remaining skills, they're less impactful, but what I recommend is just taking a background like Guild Artisan, like this character has, that gives you Persuasion as well as Insight for another conversation skill, and then just using your remaining skills to select the other conversation skills, so that you always have the option that you want at for that particular conversation and can succeed on whatever skill you need in that particular circumstance. Other than persuasion, it's not that impactful what you pick, so feel free to take other stuff for flavor reasons or just because there's something else you want to focus on more, but you definitely want persuasion with any charisma-based character that can pick it up. Other than that, no decisions to make at level 1, so let's move on to level 2. At character level 2, we get to access to our meta magic, which of course is one of the most powerful things that sorcerers get access to, and will be a key component of our sustainability and gameplay with Shadow Sorcerer in particular, because we have easy ways to gain these sorcery points back when we're playing a Shadow Sorcerer, one of the best things about this class. Of course, we also get another spell, and the spell that I recommend taking here is Magic Missile. This is another combat spell, but Magic Missile can't miss. It's 100% reliable, or 99.5% reliable, because enemies can block it with the shield spell if they have it. But other than that, it will let you finish off low-health enemies with no questions asked. Scales extremely well throughout the game, is great in specific encounters as well, where you just need to do a little bit of damage to something. Magic Missile, just an incredibly versatile and powerful spell. I would not leave home without it. For our meta magic selection here, we're going to take Twin Spell, which lets us double up on a spell, including Chromatic Orb. So twinning it to hit multiple enemies means that we will get multiple surfaces from our Chromatic Orbs, as well as do a bunch of extra damage. So hugely powerful effect here. And of course, you can use this throughout the game to double up on more powerful spells and get tons and tons of value. For our second one, we actually have an interesting choice. Both Distant and Extended Spell have a lot of interesting use cases. Extended Spell is great with any of the control spells that we have. Doubling the duration of, say, a Hypnotic Pattern is actually very useful in a lot of encounters. And Distant Spell, of course, means that we can play from further away. For this character, I'm still going to recommend Distant Spell, which I think is usually what you should take out of these two. But if you like Extended Spell, then it's certainly not wrong to take it. But because this character will often be playing from basically a fortress where you are setting up your Darkness Cloud and then hiding inside it, Distant Spell will let you still hit very distant enemies while remaining inside of your fortress, so you will never have to leave your fortified position. This character's all about setting up these areas where enemies have to come to you, and you can destroy them from there before they reach you. So Distant Spell plays very, very well into that, where you can sit on the moon and direct the battle from afar. At character level 3, we get access to second level spells, and the thing that really made us want to be a Shadow Sorcerer, Eyes of the Dark. So we get two things from Eyes of the Dark. Firstly, we just get the Darkness spell, so we get this as a spell known, which is very useful, even without the ability to see through darkness. This is a very powerful spell, blinds enemies that are inside it with no saving throw, prevents enemies from ranged attacking into it. Darkness is one of the most powerful things that you can do in Baldur's Gate 3 because it provides immunity to enemy ranged attacks, though not thrown objects. And gives enemies disadvantage on all their melee attacks against your character, so it's an extraordinarily powerful defensive tool. And getting access to it as a spell is great. The second is that we get Eyes of the Darkness. This lets us spend 2 sorcery points on a cast of darkness. It still requires our concentration, but while it's active, we also get the magical dark vision as though we were a warlock with Devil's Sight. This gives us the ability to see through darkness, so we are not blinded when inside our own darkness clouds. We can see enemies inside of other darkness clouds, and lets us basically be a warlock. As a Shadow Sorcerer, we get the benefits of a 3-level dip into warlock without having to take that dip. A lot of sorcerer builds will take 3 levels in Warlock just for the ability to abuse darkness. This character gets that without having to spend those levels, so you get 6th level spells and this incredibly powerful class feature. This ability is what makes Shadow Sorcerers so great, so obviously getting it is excellent. For our spell selection at this level, although we're often going to be concentrating on darkness, we still want Cloud of Daggers because it's just such a powerful damage spell. This is the best damage spell in general at level 2, because it does an average of 10 damage with no saving throw, and then an average of 10 damage with no saving throw again at the start of the enemy's turn, so 20 AoE damage. This will just win a lot of encounters. Having no save makes it even more powerful, so we're very happy to have this. If we're not concentrating on darkness, we're probably concentrating on Cloud of Daggers. Secondly, we're going to take a meta magic spell here, and the meta magic that we're going to take is Quicken Spell. Quicken Spell is one of the most broken things about sorcerers, letting us basically get 2 actions for every single action of other characters. Quickening a spell means we can cast an extremely powerful spell and then do another one in the same turn. So we can cast our darkness and then quicken a chromatic orb to do damage. We can cast any of our powerful spells multiple times in the same turn to burst down enemies before they go. Quicken Spell just gives us an incredibly powerful nova, so enemies will die before they ever get to act. Super powerful for every sorcerer. Shadow Sorcerer is no exception. At character level 4, we're going to take our first feat, and if you've been paying attention to my honor mode build guides, you can probably guess what feat we're going to take. With +3 initiative, we've been pretty well set up for the beginning of the game, but we will very quickly want to be able to go before every enemy in the game, regardless of their initiative. So for honor mode, I will almost always recommend that any character that can get it takes the alert feat to guarantee that you go before all of the enemies. This is even more potent for the Shadow Sorcerer because, as I mentioned, this character wants to go first even more than every other spellcaster, who already want to go first 100% of the time. So, Shadow Sorcerer benefits even more from Alert because you can block enemy attacks with Darkness and control enemies or just destroy them the same way any other sorcerer would do. I highly recommend this spell. An ability improvement for Charisma is also a reasonable choice, but you just can never go wrong with Alert, so that's what we're going to take. We also get another cantrip here, and the cantrip selection is actually fairly interesting. It will depend a little bit on what damage types you have access to from your party. We want our party to be able to easily do all of the elemental damage types without spending any resources. Poison we can get from poisoning our weapons, acid we can get from the caustic ban, so there's item options that give us these, but if you don't have those items, then you can take these cantrips in order to have access to them with your Shadow Sorcerer itself. In general, I'm going to recommend still just taking Bone Chill, because it's just such a useful combat spell. For turning off enemy healing is really good, giving undead in Act 2 disadvantage on their attack rolls is super powerful, but it is worth considering Acid Splash. Poison Spray I still wouldn't take, because 10-foot range means you won't trigger it anyways, but it's worth considering Acid Splash if your party doesn't have another easy way to deal acid damage. For our spell selection at this level, we're going to take Scorching Ray, giving us a very powerful non-concentration burst damage spell. So now we have damage over time in an AoE, we have damage that we can do in a burst, and we have a bunch of other great damage options, as well as a super powerful defensive option in the form of Eyes of the Darkness. At character level 5, we get access to 3rd level spells, which is where spellcasters hit their massive power spike and become vastly stronger. It's also where Shadow Sorcerers kind of start to feel a pinch, because Shadow Sorcerers don't get any additional spells known as they level up. We only get the ones that we learn from Sorcerer, and the Darkness spell that we get at level 3. So we have a very limited selection of spells that we can learn. You can mitigate this by taking a level of Wizard and learning all the Wizard spells, but if you're staying in Shadow Sorcerer, you have to be very careful with which spells you learn to make sure that you have a good selection of spells available for every combat. For our spell selection at level 5, pretty much every spellcaster that can get it wants to take Counterspell, because this uses your reaction to cancel an entire enemy turn. It's just one of the most powerful defensive options a party should have. Every party that can get Counterspell should have it. Our second spell, which we can get by replacing one of our earlier spells, is a little bit more interesting. For candidates to replace, I would recommend either replacing Cloud of Daggers or Scorching Ray, depending on whether you want a concentration spell at this level or a non-concentration spell. If you feel like your party needs more control, then the spell that you should take is Hypnotic Pattern, which gives your party a bunch of additional control options, and you can sacrifice Cloud of Daggers for this because then you'll still have 2 different concentration options in the form of Darkness or Hypnotic Pattern. If you feel like your party needs more damage, then you could take Lightning Bolt, especially if your party is centered around doing the wet and cold effects, where if you get an enemy wet, both very good for fan fiction and also doubles lightning and cold damage dealt to them. So Lightning Bolt will just one-shot a lot of enemies. One of these 2 spells you're going to replace one of your earlier spells with, but which one is going to depend a little bit on your party. For a generically powerful character, I'm going to recommend replacing Scorching Ray with Lightning Bolt. Upcasting Chromatic Orb is a little worse than Scorching Ray for damage, but gives you a lot of utility regardless, and Lightning Bolt is just such a good damage spell that doesn't require your concentration that I recommend taking it instead. At character level 6, we get access to another 3rd level spell, and we also get access to a very good dog in the form of Nimbus. Nimbus gives us a summon that we can have up all the time and lasts all day, and that we can resummon with a bonus action. So this gives us a ton more agency on the battlefield. I'll talk a little bit more about Nimbus in a second, but suffice to say that just having a summon on a character like a sorcerer is very powerful because it can force enemies to attack something other than your squishy sorcerer, and makes you even better at being a very defensively oriented character because enemies have this dog biting them that they just have to deal with before they can deal with your sorcerer who's standing on the moon blasting them from a cloud of darkness. For our spell selection at this level, we have a couple more options. We can go back and grab a utility spell from earlier levels. We can replace one of the spells that we've already taken if we find that we're not using a bunch of other spells. But there is a specific spell that I highly recommend having starting at level 6, and that is, of course, Haste. With a sorcerer, we can twin haste, which is very, very powerful, giving it to 2 party members, and you can concentrate on both at once. And we always have a great target for one of the haste targets in the form of Nimbus. Now, obviously, we're going to be concentrating on darkness a lot, and sometimes we're going to be concentrating on a control spell, but haste is just too powerful an option, especially twinned haste, to pass up on, so we want to have this, especially because while it's expensive in terms of spell slots, and Nimbus is expensive in terms of sorcery points, having Nimbus hasted means we're going to get a lot more spell slots to work with, because we'll be generating and triggering our omens much more frequently. We can go back and replace one of our earlier spells as well. At this level, we are unlikely to want to concentrate on Cloud of Daggers that frequently because we can be concentrating on haste, we can be concentrating on darkness, we can be concentrating on another control spell. So I'm going to recommend swapping out Cloud of Daggers for a spell that can just be game winning in some encounters in the form of Hypnotic Pattern. You can also grab another utility or emergency spell like Misty Step, go back and pick up Scorching Ray again if you feel like you're never going to concentrate on a spell like Hypnotic Pattern, but just having this win so many encounters on its own that I wouldn't recommend taking a sorcerer without it, even though often you'll be concentrating on other stuff. Let's also take a second here and talk about Nimbus. So, Nimbus is a summon that costs 3 sorcery points, which is the equivalent roughly of a 3rd level spell slot, but lasts all day and only requires a bonus action. This bonus action is very important because you can resummon Nimbus if they die, just as a bonus action, because there's no per day limit on the number of times that you can summon Nimbus, just as long as you have the sorcery points. And summoning Nimbus gets you a 42 hit point, 18 armor class summon. With haste, that's 20 armor class, with a lot of extra movement speed and multiple actions. So that's a very powerful summon defensively at this level. A lot of enemies will be able to hit 20 armor class, but not that consistently. So Nimbus's 42 hit points will go a pretty long way at 6th level. We also get a bunch of great actions when we have Nimbus available. So firstly, we get the Umbral Tangle ability, which gives you 3 turns of Shadow Cursed Vines, preventing enemies from moving if they fail the saving throw, and this is in a 10-foot AoE. So as a spell action with a 10-foot radius AoE, you can lock a whole bunch of enemies down, which is a very effective tool for a summon to have. We also get as our default action Ominous Bite. This does 3d6 of piercing damage, and if the enemy fails a Constitution save, then it will place an omen on them. Omens can be used to refresh your sorcery points, so you can summon Nimbus some more, or use more quickened or twinned spells, and give you a ton of tactical options. Here's how this ability works. When we attack an enemy with Ominous Bite, we're going to use Gale as our punching bag here. If they fail the saving throw, as Gale did here, get an omen placed on them for 3 turns. This omen is randomly one of the 6 possible elemental damage types, and then when that character takes damage of that type, your sorcerer regains a sorcery point. This damage does not have to come from the sorcerer, so while we can use Firebolt to do fire damage to Gale and regain a sorcery point, so you can see here that we hit Gale for some fire damage and go from 3 to 4 sorcery points, instantly regaining a sorcery point. The damage does not have to come from our sorcerer in order to affect this. It can even come from the creature's allies. As long as they take that type of damage, you're going to get a sorcery point back. Now, the DC that they have to save against is not that high. Nimbus's save DC on this ability is only a DC 14 Constitution save, so it's only going to happen every few times that you attack an enemy, because most enemies can pass a DC 14 save reliably, but a sorcery point is such a valuable resource that being able to trigger this in combat is extremely valuable. Secondly, of course, as you can see here, you can do it outside of combat. If we just attack Gale heals for free outside of combat as well, so you can always use him as a punching bag. You can stack sorcery points infinitely on this character as long as you have a way to deal each of the elemental damage types, or even just one of them if you have enough patience, without spending a resource. So Nimbus can just keep punching Gale, you can keep setting Gale on fire, and you can gain infinite sorcery points outside of combat. Even without abusing it to get infinite sorcery points, though, this is still a pretty reasonable effect in combat. The mini-game of hitting the enemy with the right damage type is really fun, also, and gives you back a lot of additional resources throughout the game. More sorcery points means more summons of Nimbus if they happen to die, and, of course, more quickened and twin spells. You can turn them into more spell slots, so your Shadow Sorcerer can go for longer than most other sorcerers, even though you're spending your sorcery points at a faster rate. This burn rate on your Shadow Sorcerer is actually really good, because it means you're operating at peak effectiveness even more frequently than other sorcerers. Nimbus also has a great defensive reaction, which is that they have the Splinter Shadow ability. Whenever they're attacked by a melee attack, it doesn't have to be hit, that doesn't deal radiant damage. Nimbus can splinter off a piece of themselves as a whole other dog. These dogs are uncontrollable, have 19 hit points and 14 AC, and will continue to attack. Usually they're just going to absorb 1 or 2 attacks from an enemy, but the ability to just constantly spawn more summons as Nimbus gets attacked is really valuable. That's another reason why I recommend having haste on your Shadow Sorcerer, so that you can increase Nimbus's armor class, make yourself more likely to have more splinter shadows happening all of the time. So this gives you a tremendously powerful defensive tool and also a tremendously powerful sustaining tool because of how good Nimbus is at giving you back your sorcery points. At character level 7, we get access to 4th level spells, which are less of a huge power spike than 3rd level spells, but still give us amazing options. At level 7, I think there's basically 2 choices of spell that are good to take here. Either you can take a concentration-based spell in the form of Wall of Fire, which just wins some encounters outright anytime enemies are being channeled towards you through a narrow hallway or have to come towards you for various reasons. Wall of Fire will often just win that encounter outright, so it's great to concentrate on for those encounters. Or you can take a non-concentration spell in the form of Ice Storm. For this build, I'm going to recommend Ice Storm. This character's concentration is extremely constrained, and you'll almost always want to be concentrating on either Darkness, Haste, or Hypnotic Pattern, so Wall of Fire is still good and still wins a bunch of encounters, but picking up Ice Storm gives us another control option that doesn't require our concentration, because it creates an ice surface, which enemies that walk on an ice surface have a chance to fall over. If they fall over, they lose the rest of their turn, so it's basically a giant AoE stun that also does damage. At level 8, we get another spell, and we also get a feat, and the feat that we're going to take is of course an ability improvement to boost our charisma. This makes us better at all the aspects of spell casting that we need. It doesn't increase the save DCs on Nimbus's abilities, because Nimbus has their own save DC, but does increase the save DCs on our character, which of course are very important, and increases our damage and everything accordingly. For our spell selection at this level, we can either just take Wall of Fire, still an amazing spell, or we can go back and grab a utility spell from earlier levels. Something like Misty Step for additional mobility. Mage Armor is even more attractive now because there's a lot of late game robes that we'll want to swap to, even if we have armor proficiency. So there's a bunch of great options. I'm going to suggest taking Mage Armor because we're probably going to want to swap to the Robe of the Weave pretty soon, but Misty Step is also a great option. Scorching Ray is still good just for a non-concentration damage spell from lower levels. Cloud of Daggers is still great for no save damage. You can take Fireball just to have fun chucking fireballs everywhere. All of those are great options, but you're mostly choosing between something like Misty Step and Mage Armor, or Invisibility if you need the out-of-combat utility. At character level 9, we get 5th level spells, and there are again, I think, 2 spells that really make sense, as well as some spells from earlier levels that we could go back and grab if we're really missing them. The 2 5th level spells that make sense to pick up are Cone of Cold, which is a big AoE cold damage spell. This character, as you can see, has a lightning and cold sub-theme. We have Ray of Frost, we have Ice Storm, we have Lightning Bolt, so the wet and cold effects that we can use with Cone of Cold to double its damage are very, very efficient with this character, especially if our party is built more around enabling that effect. And Hold Monster is also extremely strong in the late game. Twinning Hold Monster to lock down multiple enemies is something that we can do, or we can take Hold Person if we only want to be able to hit humanoids but want to be able to hit more of them. Upcasting Hold Person to hit a bunch of enemies is a very powerful option as well. So either we want more control with one of these single target concentration spells, or we want just more sheer damage. Again, I think we're often going to be concentrating on other spells, so I'm going to recommend taking Cone of Cold on this character, but any of the hold spells, Cone of Cold or Misty Step, or all the spells we previously discussed, still make a lot of sense. As you can see, we're very constrained on our spell selection, so this is going to be a little dependent on what other party members you have and what bases you need covered. At character level 10, we get access to another cantrip, and while of course we could take one of the cantrips that provides a damage type for our omens that we're having a little more trouble applying with our party, we're obviously just going to take True Strike to annoy people in the YouTube comments. For our spell selection at this level, we've extensively talked about the spell options at this point, and you should have a very good sense of what your party needs. The most generically strong option is either Hold Person or Hold Monster, which of course can be extremely valuable in the late game, but any of the options that we've previously discussed are great, and you should take them according to what you need and personal preference. For our meta magic at this level, we are going to take Heightened Spell. Heightened Spell is one that's easy to overlook because you get it at the same time as Quicken Spell, which Quicken Spell is one of the most broken effects in the game, so you'll always take Quicken Spell. But Heightened Spell is incredibly strong. With an effect like Hold Monster that's game-winning if you land it on an enemy, giving enemies disadvantage on their saving throws against Hold Monster or against Hypnotic Pattern, which will give all of them disadvantage, with Heightened Spell is incredibly powerful. This can force enemies to be locked down with basically no recourse, so Heightened Spell is excellent for the late game. Do not overlook this ability, even though you haven't been using it all game. When you get to later levels of Sorcerer, Heightened Spell is an incredibly powerful effect. At level 11, we get access to 6th level spells, and we also get our Shadow Sorcerer capstone ability, Shadow Walk. Shadow Walk is one of my favorite capstone abilities in the game. It's incredibly powerful, and gives your character almost infinite free mobility. For a bonus action, you can teleport up to 60 feet into any darkness in the arena, just like the Shadow Monk, except the Shadow Monk has to both leave from and teleport to darkness. The Shadow Sorcerer only has to teleport to darkness with this bonus action. In addition to that, when you use Shadow Walk, the next spell that you cast that turn will just gain the benefit of distant spells, so a 50% increase to your range. So you can use this ability as many times as you want for free, as long as you have bonus actions. So all of your spells will now have 50% extra range. This makes this character pretty much unkillable. You'll always be wildly outside of range of the enemies, and you have so much free mobility with Shadow Walk in any arena where there's darkness anywhere that this character just can't be caught by melee enemies and will be able to stay out of range of ranged enemies. Not to mention that ranged enemies can't hurt you because if there's lots of ranged enemies in an encounter, you can just stay inside a cloud of darkness using Eyes of the Dark. So in the late game, Shadow Sorcerers are nigh invincible because of how strong they are defensively between their positioning abilities with Shadow Walk and their defensive abilities in general. We also, of course, get 6th level spell access. There are several 6th level spells that are really good for this character to have, but the most important 6th level spell for a party to have is Globe of Invulnerability. Globe of Invulnerability is just a game-winning spell. It also goes with this character's defensive orientation as a caster, giving you immunity to all damage inside it. If you're in darkness and in Globe of Invulnerability, they can't even knock you out of the globe with ranged attacks or anything. And so this character can just stay inside Globes of Invulnerability and win the game very easily. Globe of Invulnerability just wins some boss fights outright, a lot of late game boss fights outright, so every party should have access to this spell. The second spell that we're very interested in from 6th level is Chain Lightning. Of course, this is a tremendous amount of burst damage and very, very powerful for a sorcerer. You can quicken it in the same turn as another spell with Chain Lightning, though you can't twin it anymore, unfortunately. But this still gives you an enormous amount of burst damage. So you can take Globe of Invulnerability, and you can replace a lower level spell with Chain Lightning, or just grab it next level when we get a second 6th level spell. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that if you took Misty Step as a spell at earlier levels, you're going to want to replace it with something else now, because we have the Shadow Walk, which is basically just Misty Step that doesn't cost a spell slot. It's a little more restrictive in its targeting, but will do a great Misty Step impression regardless, so you don't need to have Misty Step as a spell known anymore. And finally, at level 12, we gain access to our third feat, and the feat that we're going to take is of course an ability improvement to max out our charisma. This is the most effective that we can make the character, obviously, because this is your primary stat, so you want as much of it as possible. For our spell selection at this level, we're going to grab Chain Lightning to give ourselves even more burst damage, especially if we can refresh a 6th level spell using an item. So this gives the character a tremendous amount of damage, as well as utility and defensive control. Alright, my friends, that is the Shadow Sorcerer build, but of course we can make it more powerful using items, both for ourselves and our allies, so let's talk about those. For items for this character, there's actually very little that we need from items in order to make this character more powerful. The character is very, very self-sufficient, just given the abilities that you have already. So we have very low item requirements and can often make do with gear that the rest of the party doesn't need, rather than being a character that's greedy for specific items. So this character can fit very easily into a lot of honor mode parties because there aren't that many specific items that we really need. There's a couple that we benefit from a ton, and for items for this character, there's really 3 different categories of items that we're looking for. Items that improve our spell casting, items that improve our defensive capabilities, and items that make it easier for us to trigger our omens, though the last category of item can often be placed on a party member rather than on this character itself. Let's take a look at some items that I suggest and talk about what we're looking for when it comes to itemization. Because this character has such low item requirements, you will often not be using these specific items because they might be on another party member, but more items that fill very much the same role. So, firstly, we're looking for increases to our spell save DC. This is the most important stat for any spellcaster. Makes you just way better at succeeding on your spells. Your control spells will land more often. Your damage spells will do full damage more often. Increases to spell save DC, the most important stat for any spellcaster. Items like the Fistbreaker Helm are especially good because initiative is really good for this character as well. While we have +8 initiative, which is kind of the minimum that I want for endgame for honor mode, we can always use more and go before even the fastest enemies in the game. So items that give us initiative increases and spell save DC increases are both incredibly useful, increasing both our offensive and defensive capabilities. Other items like the Robe of the Weave that give us spell save DC bonuses are very good as well, and this also gives us additional armor class, so it makes a great endgame robe. Up until we get this item, we're just going to be using whatever armor our racial proficiency gives us, or another robe that gives us a spell save DC bonus, in order to have the highest armor class possible, but the Robe of the Weave combined with mage armor is a great endgame setup to ensure that we have very high armor class. One thing to note, though, is that the Robe of the Weave, Markahesh gear, and Ketheric's shield, if you have shield proficiency on your character, all have the arcane enchantment feature to boost the spell save DC, so they don't stack with one another. Usually you're going to want to choose one of these for this character and put the others on other spellcasters in your party. This character does make one of the very best Markahesh gear users in the game, so you'll probably give priority to the Shadow Sorcerer for Markahesh gear. But some other staffs that are really good, especially in the early game, include the Spell Sparkler, which performs double duty. Not only does this increase your damage, it also means that you're doing lightning damage. So if you get a lightning omen from Nimbus, then you have an easy way to do lightning damage with the lightning charges, and then lightning Markahesh gear will fill that role in the late game. So you don't need to take a spell that does lightning damage or a cantrip that does lightning damage, and can just have that passively on all your attacks and make sure that lightning is covered for a damage type that you're doing. Morning Frost is also pretty good because Chilled is just a very powerful effect, giving enemies vulnerability to cold damage. We're doing a lot of cold damage with this build, so Morning Frost is also very powerful for us. For more defensive options, you're looking at items that increase your armor class or make it harder for enemies to hit you. Items like the Ring of Protection and the Cloak of Protection, very good for this character. A lot of the time when enemies attack you, if they get to attack you at all, because you're going to be hiding in your darkness clouds a lot, they will be attacking with disadvantage, because they're going to be melee enemies in darkness who won't be able to see through it. Having high armor class both can dissuade them from even trying to attack you, and also can make it so that if they do attack you, it doesn't succeed. So it's a very powerful tool to increase your armor class. This character benefits a lot from increases to AC as a result. The other important thing for this character is to make sure that you carry a lot of scrolls. As a sorcerer, you can use your meta magic to affect scrolls, so you're the best user of scrolls in the game, and scrolls give you a very important tool for this character. As we saw when leveling up, you struggle a lot with the limited number of spells that you get access to while leveling. Scrolls obviously patch that weakness entirely. And also, a scroll of an uncommon damage type, like say a Melf's Acid Arrow scroll, can let you spend a resource that doesn't cost like a spell slot or something in order to refresh your sorcery points. So it can be very useful to have these hanging out as well, because you can use them better than other characters, and you have more uses for them than other characters. Even scrolls that normally wouldn't see a lot of usage, because they're relatively weak spells like this one, can be very, very useful for this character. Another couple specific items that you should be looking for are items that can refresh your spell slots, like the Spellcrux Amulet. This character, of course, has great uses for all of your spell slots, so any way to refresh these is going to be excellent. And especially before we get our level 11 feature, we're going to want a way to move around more easily, so a defensive item like the Amulet of Misty Step can be very helpful for this character for giving you the mobility that you are somewhat lacking in the early game if you don't have Misty Step as a spell known. The other category of items that we want are ways to trigger our omens more reliably by having lots of free sources of all of the 6 elemental damage types. Now, we covered 3 of these ourselves very easily. We have Firebolt and we have Ray of Frost, so that covers fire and ice very simply. And we're going to be using either the Spell Sparkler or Markahesh gear, generating lightning charges, so that will cover lightning in most cases as well. That means that we need acid, poison, and thunder damage in order to reliably trigger our spells. Poison we can get just by poisoning our weapons. It's a good thing to do anyways, so any weapon any party member that has a weapon, you can poison that weapon and then have them do poison damage in order to trigger the poison effect with any of the venoms. But thunder and acid are a little bit harder. Luckily, there's items that can solve this issue. The Caustic Band deals acid damage on every attack, so any party member that's making weapon attacks, we can give the Caustic Band to. It's a great item for any weapon attacking character regardless, and it means that if we get an acid omen, we have a very easy way to trigger it, so we can always get the bonus effects from the Caustic Band as well. For thunder damage, we can use reverberation. Similar to lightning charges, we can build these up so that when the enemy gets 5 or more stacks, they take reverberation damage and fall prone. This character is a great user for the Boots of Stormy Clamor and the Gloves of Belligerent Skies. We're going to be doing a lot of these damage types regardless. And so we can stack these effects on these enemies. We'll be inflicting conditions as well. So this character can wear these items, or you can put them on another party member, like a cleric using the radiating orb item set, in order to very easily apply thunder damage and trigger the omen. So these items kind of patch the the damage types that we might not otherwise have. Also, of course, if we have another character that's just making attack rolls and has Booming Blade, then we don't need to worry too much about thunder damage, because Booming Blade will do thunder damage for free every turn. But this gives us yet another way that we can trigger those effects. But overall, the rule of thumb when you're looking for items for this character are you don't need too many specific items, so other characters should get priority before this one usually. But you do want increases to your spell save DC and spell casting abilities, you want increases to your defenses, and you want to make sure that your party has a good mix of damage types, ideally without spending any resources, so you can easily trigger the omens when they show up. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the Shadow Sorcerer, and I hope it helps you plan your honor mode runs. This is an extremely powerful character, both offensively and defensively, fits very well into every party, so should make a great addition, whatever run you're planning to do. Plays especially well, of course, with Warlocks and other Darkness users, because the more Darkness synergy there is in your party, the better, and especially well with other characters that are doing lightning and cold damage, because getting enemies wet synergizes very well with itself. As always, of course, if you have enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a comment and hit like, helps me out a ton with the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that, and you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, folks. I'll catch you next time.